Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dribble Drive podcast. I'm your host, Austin Render. Dalton Shetler will join us here shortly. It's a great episode today. Bonus Friday episode with the ESPN women's basketball bracketologist Charlie Creme. Fantastic episode. That conversation's coming your way here in just a minute. We'll have me, Dalton, and Charlie breaking down 13 teams projected in his preseason bracketology from the Big Ten. Some housekeeping notes for you. We are a part of the Back Home Network YouTube channel, brought to you by Home Field Apparel. Head that way, subscribe to the channel, stay up to date on all of our episodes when we go live, all that stuff. We're also available on Apple and Spotify podcasts if you're more of an on-the-go podcast listener. There's also our social media account on X, at Dribble Drive WBB. Stay up to date on all our social content. We'll have episode clips, links to the episodes, schedules of when we're going to be going live. So give us a follow there. Stay up to date on all things the Dribble Drive podcast. One big note that I felt like I needed to record a little separate open for this podcast. Obviously, we're going to talk bracketology, and one of the teams we're going to talk about is Minnesota. Some big news this week after we recorded with Charlie Creme. And if you're a Minnesota fan, it's not awesome news. Mallory Heyer has announced that she is entering the transfer portal, which is a shocking news this close to the season. We're less than a week and a half away from the start of the season. She started every game that she's played at Minnesota, 102 games. She averaged a little over 8 points, 9.5 points and 8 rebounds over her last 3 seasons. Led Minnesota in rebounding last season, in double-doubles as well. She was a Lindsay Whalen recruit that stayed through Dawn Putzaway, but something happened. We obviously aren't privy to all the details, and we don't need to be. But that all we do here is let you know that's a big loss for Minnesota. That's somebody who, again, had started 102 games, was projected to be a starter again this year for Minnesota. She is now transferring out of the program. Now, she can announce that she's going somewhere. To my knowledge, she cannot play this season for anyone else. The transfer portal window has closed. She can kind of have a little handshake that says, hey, I'm going to go to such and such school, but she won't be eligible this season to do so. So we won't see Mallory Heyer in 2025-26 season. And Minnesota is going to look a little different. Now, Minnesota is certainly not in bad shape. This is a team that we have been very high on this podcast because of all that they have returning from last year's team. One of those was Mallory Heyer, but they've got Mara Braun coming back and healthy. Grace Grahalski, Amaya Battle, Tori McKinney, Sophie Hart, Taylor Woodson. A lot of players coming back. I think this opens up a starting spot now, probably for Tori McKinney. Is maybe that is even what happened. Maybe Tori McKinney had beaten Mallory Heyer out for that starting spot. But I kind of saw it as Mara Braun, Grace Grahalski, Mallory Heyer, and Sophie Hart. I think that the Heyer departure now puts Tori McKinney in line to start along with the rest of those returning players. So Minnesota's still got weapons. Finau Tonga coming over from San Jose State. Tracy Berger's coming over from UAB. Riley Glenn from Kansas State. They've got some good freshmen as well. So I don't know necessarily what this does in my thoughts for Minnesota moving forward. I had them 6th in my standings, and I think I would maybe flip them with Washington and bump them to 7. This hurts the depth of Minnesota, which I think is something that's one of their strongest suits coming into this season, is their depth and what they've established while Mara Braun's been out. But I don't know if it totally dampers the season. But if Mara Braun were to get shaken up again, or there's injuries down the line somewhere for Minnesota, we hope obviously that that's not the case. But now the depth is going to be challenged a little bit more with the loss of a potential starter in that lineup. So certainly some news that we needed to touch on here at the top of the podcast. We're going to talk about Minnesota coming up in this conversation. Just keep a note that anything we might talk about with the Gophers, that this was pre the Mallory Heyer decision to enter the transfer portal, but wanted to make sure we put that at the top of the episode. Quick reminder on the schedule coming up next week. We've got a Wisconsin preview. We're working on making that happen. And then we will have a week 1 preview posted on Friday ahead of a big week of opening games in the Big Ten. So 2 more episodes next week before we get the season started. Excited to finally have some basketball to talk about, not too far away. November 3rd is when everything kicks off in women's basketball. So with that being said, let's toss it to our conversation. Myself, Dalton Shetler, and the ESPN bracketologist Charlie Creme. We're talking about 13 Big Ten teams in his projected field. I'd be curious to talk to him now with the loss of Mallory Hire, how that changes where Minnesota is. But this conversation recorded before that. So thanks for listening. Stay tuned for this conversation with Charlie Creme. We'll talk to you guys next week. And we're now joined by the ESPN women's basketball bracketologist, Charlie Creme, 3rd time on the podcast. Charlie, thanks for joining us. We have a lot to talk about because you have put 13 Big Ten teams in your preseason bracketology. So how are you? Are you getting any sleep as you prepare for this season? Because I'm sure by the time you get midseason, the sleep starts to dwindle.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch as much preemptive sleep as I can, especially before conference season starts. Right, by January is when things kind of really ramp up. The schedule gets more intense, and my sleep hours diminish. So yeah, we're kind of in that just getting out of our summer hibernation phase, I guess, right now.
Well, Charlie, if you're up at 3 a.m., feel free to text me. I got a newborn at home, and I'm up at all hours of the night. So feel free.
Okay.
I'd love to talk bracketology with you.
Yeah. When I'm watching some games that I've recorded, and I got some Big Ten questions. Maybe
there we go.
Yeah, now I know somebody I can talk to.
That's right.
Dalton's gonna be trying.
I'm alone in the middle of the night out there.
Dalton's going to be trying to promote Michigan State women's basketball at 3 a.m. to Charlie Creme. Hey, I think you get the double buy, and this is why. Dalton, it's 4:30 in the morning. Go to bed.
I love it.
Well, without further ado, we got 13 teams to talk about, but just broadly, Charlie, 13 teams is a ton. Is it more at this stage in October? Is it more of the reputation of the depth of the Big Ten? Is it you looking at the talent incoming into this conference and saying all these teams are there? Is it a mix? How do you go about trying to figure out in October who's going to be in that field of 64?
Yeah, I know that's a great question, Austin. It's kind of a combination of a bunch of things. I think in this particular case, because I'll be honest, I go through this without conference affiliation really being part of the mix. And then it just sort of works itself out that way. And I think what you get in October, it's tough to really predict who those sort of second place, if you want to call them, mid-major teams might be that also have qualifications to make the tournament. So most of the mid-major leagues at this point have one team. You know, you're just kind of picking their conference champion. And of course, we get later in the season, and a couple of these teams either don't have the seasons that you thought they would, or they get, as we get way down in the season, they get knocked off in the conference tournament, but they put together a resume that necessitates them being in the NCAA tournament. That takes away from a conference like the Big Ten if they've got a lot of bubble teams. And I think that's what might happen this year in the Big Ten is it's very deep. I don't know that outside of perhaps UCLA, it's got that one singular team that can be there at the very, very end. But it's the depth is there. So you're gonna, I think it's reflected in my bracketology. You're gonna see a lot of 7, 8, maybe even 10, potentially 11 seeded teams from the league, and it's partly because of that depth. And if that could possibly bear itself out, it'll take things like chalk in the leagues across the country that are sometimes, can get mid-majors, it can get 2 bids possibly. And it's also going to take a lot of balance within the conference. You're going to have teams that play each other twice. You're going to have them split, for instance. You're not going to have, if you have too much gap within the standings, then it's going to eliminate some of these teams. So maybe 13 may sound a little ambitious right now, but it's really kind of it's about the balance of the league, and it's about sort of the numbers game that you're trying to play this early in the process.
Well, this question may not have an obvious answer, but I'm curious about it because we talked about 13 teams for a little while last year, and a lot of the rationale from you, Charlie, was the bubble was having a weak year. Is there any way to forecast the strength of a bubble like this upcoming season? Do we have any idea if what it kind of could be, or does that have to play itself out?
It really has to play itself out. I think where I start to formulate the idea of, do we have a lot of teams that are in that at-large pool, or is our large pool minimized kind of like it was last year? That really starts to shake itself out right away. Those November, December games become really important to that. Is the Big Ten, when they play outside of the Big Ten, are they going to have a lot of success? And then because then the resumes, the foundation of those resumes is set. And then the more of those teams that perform well in that circumstance, the bigger the bubble presents itself as we move forward. So I think what happened last year is that we had just not enough balance in November, December. The really good teams won all those games and fairly decisively. And the teams that kind of the middling teams, so to speak, the teams that would be bubble considered, didn't win many of those games. Or I guess maybe just not enough of those upsets. And that creates resumes that are just a little bit weaker for those teams that you're considering in that 10, 11 seed kind of range.
Well, UCLA is certainly going to be nowhere near the bubble. We expect them to be at the top of the conference, maybe the top of the country. Everything starts with them in the Big Ten. Could they be, and it's hard to know in October, but with everything coming back, adding Gianna Neepkins, adding Sienna Betts, could they be better this year than they were last year on their run to the Final Four?
I think it's possible. I think it maybe even probable. I don't know, because the names you mentioned, they did lose basically that entire freshman class that they brought into transfers, but they replaced that class with veterans or ultra talented, in the case of Sienna Betts, younger players. So, and the pieces might fit a little bit better too. And that part will play out as we start to see them play games. And their non-conference schedule is insanely tough. So we're going to know really about UCLA. And as November even just evolves, from the beginning of the month to the end of the month, I think they might play 5 teams that you could consider possibly top 15, certainly top 20 teams. And what we see at the end of the month, I think when they play Oklahoma versus when they get started, if there's already sort of an evolution in their performance, because there are some new pieces that Corey Close is going to have to put together. But I think the pieces might fit together better. Neepkins, I think, is the key to that, because she can do a few different things, and she fills that kind of taller wing shooter that they really haven't had in this sort of incarnation of the roster, and as they've kind of taken the program to the next level. So I think she's a huge key to then fitting those other pieces around her and figuring out where does Sienna Betts fit into the rotation. Are you going to play her with her sister, or is she going to be her sister's backup, or what's the combination of those two things? And I'm guessing we're going to see some of that change as the year goes on too. It may start as she just comes off the bench and probably gives her sister breathers. And then as we get toward the games that start to really mean more in late February, and then we get into the tournament, that we may see them on the floor together when Corey Close wants that big lineup. And matchups are always key in the NCAA tournament. I know we're going way down the road here with this, but these are the things that, of course, we all think about as we're trying to process this stuff as early as October.
And while we're up at 3:00 in the morning. So these are all the thoughts that we have.
Exactly. And they get a little more delusional at 3:00 in the morning. So then you start, is Sienna Betts going to lead the country in 3-point shooting? And things like that start to enter your mind in those 3:00 in the morning scenarios.
I love it. So we all agree UCLA, we expect to be hosting in the NCAA tournament. It would be honestly just a stunner if we didn't end up in that spot by the end of the season. But how many teams, Charlie, do you see with real shots to host in the NCAA tournament? Looking at your bracketology, you have Maryland a 3 seed hosting, you have Michigan a 4 seed hosting, Iowa, USC, you has 5 seeds. And Michigan State you have as a 6 seed. So you've got a lot of teams in that range. How many could we actually expect?
I don't think we'll get all of them. Obviously, I didn't place all of them in the top 16, but I think all of the teams you mentioned have a legitimate shot. But there's every, and this is the case with every team around the country. There's so much fluctuation now in rosters and in who you're adding and who you ended up having to subtract or subtracted themselves. There's so much more unknown. I'm going through an exercise right now. I'm putting together a prediction of who the conference players of the year will be in each league. And it's never been harder to do that because so many of these players have switched teams. And I think even within some conferences, they don't know what they have with some of the personnel on their schools. So it's there's so much of that in flux right now. But do some of the additions at Michigan State work out better than maybe I'm predicting right now? They could be a team certainly. Is it going to take a while for those additions to find their roster, the roster rotation spots and roles? That's going to play into it. And I think we could probably say the same thing about so many teams in the Big Ten. Even as we get further down the line, you're looking at teams with Indiana is a good example. So many new faces or players that are going to have to take on significantly different roles. Oregon is like that as well. And to a lesser degree, I think we have those teams that you talked about, Dalton, the Iowas, the Michigan States. There are some foundational pieces there. Mm-hmm. So they sit higher in the hierarchy right now because we have a sense of what at least the bulk of their starting lineup could look like, or what the rotation, who we can depend on as someone who's going to perform from the jump. But there's super question marks about all of those teams. Maryland, seemingly on an annual basis, goes through a big transformation with transfers, and it seems to always work out. So, Austin, earlier you'd mentioned reputation a little bit. That's kind of where the reputation part comes in, is you kind of give Brenda Frese the benefit of the doubt because she's been able to incorporate this process of getting new players, veteran players as transfers in and making it work pretty quickly and ultimately having success with that. So I give Maryland the benefit of the doubt. I think Maryland's a team that actually, moved up a significant amount to me from when I last did a bracketology in April before I went to my summer hibernation to now. I think they look better on paper to me, however many months, 6 months difference in and they maybe they added some pieces, or I looked at maybe the rotation a little bit different, but that's an example of we still really don't know what we have until we see it. So as I said, I think that permeates throughout a lot of the schools in the Big Ten, but there's a lot of veteran coaches who you do give the benefit of the doubt. They'll figure it out. And it's like that around the country as well. You mentioned Iowa. There's foundational stuff there too. And that's another, you've got Hannah Stuelke to build around. You've got a veteran backcourt players to build around. And the idea is, well, we can rely on them performing at the level, at least that they have performed thus far in their career. And we can put them in the mix right now, but it's like never before are there question marks surrounding all of this. which makes my job either more fun or more maddening. I haven't quite figured it out yet.
Well, it does feel like that's where the Big Ten was. As good as the conference was last year, it was lacking the upper echelon teams. You obviously had the 2 LA schools, and if Juju doesn't get hurt, who knows what happens with them down the stretch. But then there was a bit of a drop-off. I know Maryland and Ohio State did both host, but it didn't feel like they were the most trendy host upsets for most people in their brackets. So now we're looking at the bracketology this year, and it honestly looks very similar. It's UCLA in that position, and then there's a lot of teams trying to jockey for those final hosting spots. I'm curious with Maryland, Charlie, they obviously have a lot of turnover, but one of those turnovers is a known commodity in Yarden Garzon within the Big Ten. So how much do you say she's new to the system, but she's not new to the conference? We know what she can do and up her value a little bit.
Yeah, and that's certainly part of it, is that she's not unfamiliar with what she's going into, and Brenda Fries, as she puts things together, is not unfamiliar with the talent that she has because she's seen it. And Garzon is one of those players that can do so many different things. You can pop her into a different role and make it work. She's a great passer. She's obviously a tremendous shooter. She can run a team. So you can put her on the wing. You can put the ball in her hand. So she's kind of a unique talent in that sense. And I think she's going to have a pretty big year. I think I'm banking on her having a big year, making Maryland a team that's in that host range right now and is as high as like 10 in the country. I think it's ultra dependent on her having a big year and being even better maybe than the player she was at Indiana. And that's a pretty high bar.
I do want to ask, because I've got a billion questions, so I'm just kind of bouncing around, Charlie. I'll ask you to follow with me.
My answers seem to be bouncing around too, so that's fine.
But taking a look at the latest bracketology, if you look at the amount of bids per conference, the Big Ten was at 13, as we've talked about, the ACC at 11, the SEC at 9. And it seems to be a fun debate that a lot of people like to have in college women's basketball. What is the best conference? Of course, Austin and I might have a little bit of bias. We believe the Big Ten. But when you look at the amount of bids, and I know a lot of the conversation also goes around the SEC, do you have an opinion on this, or how does it shake out to you?
Well, it is a really interesting question, because it honestly, the analysis of best conference oftentimes into what your measuring sticks are.
Right.
And I think a couple of years ago, I did something where I did you kind of took some analytical numbers from the teams in each league, and then kind of my projected seed and averaged those, and maybe projected the top 25 rankings and how many teams that were ranked in the top 20, put all that together in a mix and came out with a number, and that decided who we thought the best conference was. And it was fun to go through. It's fun to try to put numbers on it. I'm not sure it ultimately works necessarily, if that's the way to do it. I don't know. When you can put numbers on it, at least it gives you something to lean on as to whatever decision you came to. So I do have an opinion, because I don't want to. I'm not trying to skirt your question, because but it does come down to that philosophy of what you view. The Big Ten's probably the top to bottom, probably the deepest league. But if you look at the SEC, and even though it has the third highest number of bids, most of those bids are really high up on the board. In fact, what I project right now has too many teams in the top two seeds in order to do a bracket that generally we like to see aesthetically. The way it sets up, you're going to have SEC teams, high-ranking SEC teams in the same region together, just because that's the way I look at it. So I would say I'm going to lean the SEC based on that. Just there's enough depth at the top, if you're really parsing it down, to say, and they have, I'd say, legitimately three teams that I would say could win the national championship. I think only we have one from the Big Ten. And honestly, I don't think now the ACC falls somewhere in between there because I think it's deeper top to bottom than the SEC. There are a few, I guess, and what that means essentially is there are fewer bad teams, right? And of course, it also helps the size of these leagues also contributes to the number of bids. So that's that plays into it too. But the ACC falls in between. Like I said, not maybe quite has more bad teams, if you want to say that, than the Big Ten. Maybe less than the SEC, but not as many good teams as the SEC, and maybe a couple better, higher on the board teams than the depth at the top is maybe a little bit better than the ACC. But I'd probably put the ACC third because I don't think there's a team. I think Duke's really good. I think NC State's got the potential to be really good. And those are the two best teams in the league. But I don't think either one of them are going to win the national championship. And so I think at least the Big Ten has a team that can win it. And certainly a Final Four favorite. I don't think you can say that the ACC even has a Final Four favorite, given what the rest of the country has. So if I had to rank the three, I would probably go SEC, Big Ten, ACC. And it's a very subjective measurement based on the things that you said. And so because I could say, well, I think the ACC doesn't have as much depth as the Big Ten, and someone could argue, yeah, but Duke and NC State are better than anybody but UCLA, and that would be a legitimate counter. But if you're asking me, and I guess that's why I'm on the podcast, you are exactly doing it. That's the ranking I would give for now. And obviously when they start playing games for real, and November, December decides a lot of this. I think we've gotten, and this is me getting on my soapbox a little bit, if you indulge me for just a second. We've gotten to the point with college basketball, and we're diehards. We're watching from day one. We're following it in the summer, but most people consume it now. They tune into it when the NFL season ends. Right? Both men and women's college basketball. It's sort of it's a secondary white noise, almost part of the sports environment up until the NFL season is done. And then all of a sudden people jump in late February and start to, this is I guess where it's fun to do what I do, because a lot of people go right to Bracketology to find out, who's good? Who should I be watching? Well, what's even going on in college basketball? And then they're tournament centric. All they care about is the tournament. But the reality of it is for people like the three of us, November, December matter a whole heck of a lot. A lot of what those people jump in on in late February was formed in November and December. And so the shakeout of some of these teams, and then subsequently the leagues and how you view the leagues, shakes out of how they play in the non-conference. Because once they get into conference play, you don't really know. Is it just attrition because they're all playing each other? If they haven't established anything in November and December, then that question mark looms. If they have, then you can honestly say, well, they did their part in performing against teams outside of their league. And now when they beat each other, it really is a good beating good. And then that manifests itself into how these teams are viewed by myself, by the committee, how their net numbers and all the analytics start to shake out too. So November, December, I plead with people, hey, tune in, watch some little college basketball. Thanksgiving weekend doesn't have to be all about watching the NFL and Texas A&M, Texas football, or Ole Miss and Mississippi State football. It can be about watching those high-profile college basketball tournaments around the country, in the Caribbean. And because it does set the stage for everything that comes after.
Hey, you get quad boxes for a reason, so let's fill them up. Let's put some basketball in there.
Exactly. There's plenty of football, but there's enough room in that quad box to slide a basketball game in, and there's plenty of inventory out there to tune in. Or hey, look, some of them are on streaming services. Get your quad box. Put your 2 college football games on, your NFL game, and I don't know, in the Game Show Network for all I care. But, but bust out a laptop and put on one of the streaming services that shows all of these games and have it on. And if you're into college basketball, be an observer of it early so you have a better education when it comes to February and March as we get to Selection Sunday. I mean, I admire the people who rely on me for this stuff, but tune in too. Give it a look.
He's a company man. Tune in. All right. We got a lot of games on our airwaves here. One of the teams that I think we have the most question marks about in terms of like one of the best teams that we don't totally know about is USC. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the Juju Watkins situation not going to play this season. You still have them as a 5 seed. It's kind of where when people have asked me, where do you see USC? I say, I think they're still going to be contending for a host position. What makes you believe in USC and what has you a little bit hesitant on the Trojans?
Well, obviously, the hesitancy is largely built around the Juju injury. They became very Juju dependent in a lot of ways last year, especially toward the end. But they did have Kiki Irafen, so they had another veteran player they could turn to who had the experience, who'd been down the road in the NCAA tournament. And that's why they still were able to have some success even after Juju got hurt. Certainly, won a game, played well against UConn. But a lot of questions still persist. They've had a whole off season to kind of figure this out, but there's still some things that you wonder about with a team and a program that has been so defined by one player over the last couple of years. Now that said, and they lost some players in the portal too. That's a big question. Avery Howell is now still in the league at Washington, but I think she was a big loss. Kaylee Heckle I think is going to help UConn, and I think her departure does hurt USC because she was, I think, playing much better at the end of the year than she did early on, and I think that's pretty natural for most freshmen. So I think those 2 losses also hurt quite a bit. But I also think that I think Kennedy Smith showed real flashes last year, and I think if she doesn't have Juju around, she may get more opportunity. We may see an even better version of her. And if you listen to anybody who really, really follows the recruiting world, Jazzy Davidson has a chance to be one of the next faces of the sport. She's that good and can do that many different things. And if that's true, then the talent level, while it's fallen off because you can use a player like Juju, obviously you're not as talented as you would have been otherwise, but that they do have a considerable amount of talent still in the program. It's young, with both Smith and Davidson. You want that part, but it's talent, and talent wins out more times than it doesn't. And that's why I still have them as a contender. And the players that are left on the roster, while I did say they were Juju dependent, those players have experience winning, and that helps too. That they know kind of what it takes, what coaching they expect to get as the program evolves and it tries to improve, and that experience certainly is going to help them because they have a decent non-conference schedule too. We're going to see some of these answers and some of these evolutions, I guess you could say, as the season wears on in the US, especially because they are young, because they have different. They're going to have to have somewhat of a different philosophy without Juju. But I think the 5 seed, I think we could probably all agree, is based on the fact that there's still a lot of talent on that roster.
Well, I also wanted to ask you, too, if we get past the class that we've talked a little bit about with some of these programs at the top, you have a couple of 7 seeds from the Big Ten in Washington and Ohio State. You've got Minnesota, Indiana as 8 seeds. You have Nebraska and Oregon as 9 seeds. So 6 different teams in that group from 7 to 9. And I want to ask you, because Austin and I had to take cracks at filling out a ballot and hair splitting. We did our best. How did you do the hair splitting between these programs?
With a very, very fine blade. But you nailed it. That's exactly the term to use here, because I don't know that there's a ton of difference between Oregon and Indiana, or Minnesota and Nebraska. I think you throw all like those four. That's just off the top of my head. You throw them into a pot, and them playing each other is going to be the only thing I think that's really going to likely separate them. They all have significant things that they need to replace. I think and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is the nod on the slightly higher might go to the programs that have the least to replace, or have, like in the case of Indiana, I think there's a big roster change. You lose a Garzone, that's not something you just flip a switch and have a replacement for. But there's a winning history recently. So I guess in Terry Moore, we trust sort of is part of what I applied to Indiana and where I placed the Hoosiers, as opposed to where I placed Oregon. Kelly Graves has done some winning too, but Indiana's winning has been more recent. They've had more recent successes. So I'm kind of, a little bit of program momentum maybe is another way to look at it. So, but honestly, the differences amongst those teams is negligible. It's splitting hairs. It really is. And it will come down to how these rotations come together for these coaches, how they're able to put them together. What's the chemistry look like? And chemistry is such a vague term, but does the personnel fit the philosophy of what the coach wants to do, and how well does it fit? How soon does it fit well in terms of where these teams might be seated toward the end of the year, or are they bubble teams, or if they securely in as we reach the Big Ten tournament, things like that. And it's all going to hinge on some of the some of those intangibles and how those intangibles evolve, because I fully expect that at least a couple of these teams are going to look a lot different in February than they do in early December. They should. Most teams should. Some, we've seen historically, and not just in the Big Ten, but teams they peak early, and then something goes off. The whole thing kind of goes slightly off the rails, and they're not as good in February as they were in November. Or maybe they were the same team, but other teams evolved at a higher rate, at a better rate, and just surpassed them. Or chemistry breaks down, or something like that. But we've also seen, and there's more examples of this, teams that are dramatically different in every good way in February. And evaluating those teams is sometimes a little more difficult, because they don't have the resume in November, December to even consider. But your eyes tell you the way they're playing, they're just a lot better. And you've got to kind of look at that part too. And I think with some of these teams, we're going to see that if they are truly good enough to be in the tournament, they will be a better version of themselves in February than they were in November. And I think most coaches kind of coach to that, or want to see that. And there's enough. Every one of these teams I think we just talked about in that mix have veteran coaches, or at least in the case of Nebraska, Oregon, and Indiana, they got veteran people that have been in the program for a long time. Their philosophy and their approach to things is already well established, and we'll see how well that works with the personnel they have during this course of evolution of the season.
And I won't make you pick which team is most likely to fall out. We're a positive podcast here. We're going to talk about people getting into the tournament. But based on your seedings, Illinois is the last one of the last teams you have in your field. So I'm curious where you sit on Illinois, because I think they might have one of the higher ceilings in the conference with this freshman class. But again, it's freshmen, so it's hard to determine how they're going to be. So where do you sit on Shauna Green's squad?
It's interesting you do bring that up, Austin, about Illinois, because I just was kind of looking at my list again last night as I'm going through some of these other things that I'm putting together that'll be posted over the next couple of weeks on ESPN.com. Shameless plug. That Illinois was a team I just happened to glance at my list last night and said, do I have that right? Are they better than this? Are they actually better than some of the other teams in the Big Ten that I evaluated higher a few weeks ago? Or should I not be second guessing myself? I don't know. So they were that team, and it was because of that. Because they've got some highly rated recruits. They've got a couple top 50 kids, and so I don't know. I guess the answer to your question is you might be right. That's a team that does have a higher ceiling than maybe some of these other teams, but there's so much unknown when you're already talking about transfers and team different new faces in different places and trying to figure out how that's going to all fit together. And then you go to the next phase and say, well, what a program that has a lot of freshmen, what are we doing with them in terms of analysis? Because we really don't. At least we've seen some of these other players do their thing elsewhere. So it's really all about, is the fit the right thing? In the case of the freshmen, we don't even know truly how talented they are because we haven't really seen them. You can watch a couple of YouTube videos here and there, but what does it really tell you? You're mostly going to see good stuff on the YouTube videos. When we start watching 40 minutes of basketball, we're going to see all the warts if there are any, and that's hard to determine obviously ahead of time. So I think you might be right. Again, we want to go back to talent, right? There's talent there that would lift Illinois to a higher place in the mix, but it's tough to get a season started with freshmen. And I don't have it off the top of my head, so I apologize. But in looking at it, I don't think Illinois has the toughest of non-conference schedules, which is probably smart when you've got young players. But it also doesn't help your resume come selection time. So you're going to have to perform in the Big Ten. The other Big Ten teams that went out and played teams and maybe beat teams in the non-league, those are the teams you're going to have to beat once you get into conference play to give you the kind of resume, the kind of analytic data, the net rating that you're going to need to be considered safe when we get to selection time.
They are playing 3 non-con road games at Oregon State, at Florida State, and at Missouri. So whatever you think of those teams, at least they're challenging themselves on the road. But again, young teams.
And that's good. Yeah. That is really good. And it is something that you throw your freshmen into the fire. But as of right now, I don't think Oregon State nor Missouri are going to be resume building teams.
Yeah.
Now winning on the road is always helpful, and I could be Oregon State that's a program that can throw you a curveball. Scott Rulick is somehow a magician in a certain ways, in the way he's had to deal with personnel loss and still managed to keep a relevant program. And he's done this a few different times. So who knows? And Missouri just changed coaches too. So also who knows? Kelly Harper going into Missouri could quickly turn things around. She did it. I think she did a good job at Tennessee. It's never easy. She just didn't do historically great things that Tennessee fans are used to. So it just didn't last. But it's, she's someone who can turn around a program. She's done it. She's had success 3 different times. So I might be wrong in my assessment of those 2 programs, but on paper right now, the personnel just isn't there. So those may not be resume building wins if Illinois can get them, but it is, thanks for looking that up, by the way. It is good to go on the road in any circumstance. That means more if you get a win away from home than it does, than it does playing a directional school at home, for sure.
We have a good research team here at the Dribble Drive. They were quick on that one, so appreciate them.
I've got 330 some odd schedules I got to try to keep in my head.
Impossible. I can't even do the 18 that we have here. But the only reason I'm asking this, Charlie, is because last year, almost a year ago, we were on this podcast, you and I said, is there anybody that you don't have in the field that you see getting in? And you said, I just don't think so. I don't think Michigan has it yet. And then, of course, Michigan jumped in pretty definitively. I think Dalton and I would agree with you that the 5 teams you don't have in the field right now don't feel like NCAA tournament teams. But I'm going to give you a shot here. Is there a team that you feel like could make a push, or are you good with the 13 that you've highlighted?
So, Austin, you want 14? Is that what you're trying to
get greedy? I'm getting
just
greedy.
make the Big Ten tournament the NCAA tournament.
Let's just stop playing. Once they get done with the Big Ten tournament, it's over. That's all we need. Well, I guess I'm going to say the same thing. I really don't. I think the movement would be some of the stuff we've already talked about. There's always that team that you just don't foresee. But gosh, with 13, I feel like I vetted it pretty well.
I think you've got your bases covered with 13.
With the 13. So I'm going to answer the same way. I'm going to say no. I don't think so. But I'm sure we'll do this again this time next year, and there's a program we'll be talking about amongst that group that, a player emerged that we didn't anticipate. A coaching move or maneuver seemed to work really well. But I'm gonna stick to my guns here, at least for now, and say the 13 is it. And quite honestly, if I'm being fair, I don't really think 13. Maybe I shouldn't say this. I think 13. I really do think it's possible, but certain things have to happen. And we kind of discussed that at the beginning. It's a numbers game, and around the country, certain things have to happen. First of all, the performance on the floor has to be there. Right. We've got to all these teams have to establish tournament worthy resumes, however you want to define that. And different people have a different way of defining that. But, I kind of throw a bunch of teams in what you call the at-large pool. And did they beat enough teams in that at-large pool? Because that's to me, if you're beating other teams that are deemed tournament worthy, then you're tournament worthy. So there's that. But then we also have to then the math problem begins. And is there going to be chalk around the country in some of these mid-major leagues? Like, is South Dakota State going to win the Summit tournament? Because they're typically a program that has at-large worthiness. How good last year the WCC was kind of down, but in the past they've been able to manage 2 bids. Are they going to be back to where Gonzaga is a no-brainer to get into the tournament, and then they lose the tournament final like they did a couple of years ago, and then they end up with a couple of teams in? And I know this is going way, way deep into the weeds and way deep into the calendar, but these are the in terms of, can the Big Ten get 13 in? Sure. Do I think they have 13 teams that have the potential to be worthy to play in the NCAA tournament? Yes. Do the numbers work out when all is said and done? That's the question. So it might be 11.
The odds would say somebody's going to fall out.
Somebody's going to fall. And do they play themselves out of it? It's all kind of made up right now anyway, right? I do this with a lot of work and a lot of earnestness, and I try to be right, so to speak, whatever right means. But it's still basic guesswork with analytics involved, and what I know about each program and what I know about each player, personnel, and the talent level and the fit and all of those things. It's all based on that. And there's a lot of thought that gets put into it. I don't want to dismiss what I do as something that I'm just throwing darts. I'm not doing that. But some of the teams we discussed, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of new faces. There's a big time roster upheaval, and you don't really know how that's going to shake out. So some teams could play themselves out almost right away in those first 2 months. We talked about how important they are. You could have, the season already is off the rails, and there's probably not a realistic scenario where they're going to get back on track in order to be a tournament team. 13 is sort of maybe the perfect scenario. And maybe that's the picture I've painted right now is the perfect scenario, because it's easier to predict what we expect from an Oregon or a Nebraska or a Washington or, those kinds of than it is to predict what's going to happen in some of the non-power 4 leagues. They come March. Yep. So you have to predict kind of what you do sort of know. And I don't know of any emerging programs from some of these other leagues that would make it a two-headed race where all of a sudden or upsets that get pulled off in those November, December games by some that puts them, at the forefront of an at-large bid that you just didn't see coming. So all of those things play in. So I guess 13 would be best case scenario. The way I look at it right now.
Yeah, we won't get greedy and ask for.
But it goes the 11 and the ACC is the same way. Exactly the same thing. Even the 9 in the SEC, same thing. I think in the SEC there's probably 7 almost absolute locks, but the totals that I have for the big conferences is probably best case scenario, and based on what we just discussed about not knowing what could possibly happen come late February and early March around the country.
We know nothing, but what we do know is that this is going to be a really fun year in the Big Ten. We also know that you've been pretty darn good at this bracketology thing. So we appreciate you stopping by and letting us know what's going on with 13 Big Ten teams maybe getting in. But thank you so much, Charlie. We'll certainly hold you to the next year thing where we can hold you to the fire and the Penn State fans can throw electronic tomatoes at you or whatever it may be. But we certainly appreciate it.
Absolutely love coming out with you guys. It's always great talk. Always enjoy it.
Well, keep listening. For those of you who are watching us on the YouTube channel, we'll continue to be there. We are so close to the start of the season on the Back Home Network YouTube channel and on Apple and Spotify podcasts for Dalton Shetler and ESPN from the Dribble Drive.